Humanism has interesting assumption about humans. Humanism has this belief that all humans want the same thing and they understand idea of freedom equally reasonable. But the problem is we have different notion of freedom. Everyone has different idea of freedom and everyone define freedom quite differently. If you were brought up in a different culture, your idea of freedom quite different than, for example, idea of freedom somebody else who came from a different culture. And what is exactly freedom? Because you can define freedom the way is to have responsibilities before yourself, before your family, before your country. And also freedom requires such an amount of sacrifices. You have to be able to sacrifice what really matters for your freedom, because freedom is the ultimate goal of your happiness. But unfortunately, majority of people see freedom as hedonistic desires. You satisfy yourself, you satisfy your biology. But the problem with this idea, once you designate freedom as your biological freedom, you become enslaved by your biology, by your impulses, by your urges. That's how you define freedom. I mean, real freedom is involuntarily restraint of your biology. You're supposed to subjugate your biology to your mind and not the other way around. And that's why I think real freedom is, and that's what freedom you have to be able to die for. Otherwise, you're not free. Also, humanism assumes that everybody is good. And again, how you define goodness and how you define evilness. I like Shakespeare when he said that there's no good and evil, but thinking makes it so. Because that's the way we think about things. Common culture produces common stories we all want to write. And our stories derive its roots from religion, for example. The West was built on Judeo-Christian traditions, and that's our story, that's our culture, that's everything we need to know and everything we need to follow. People who come from different cultures, they have different perception of reality with a different story they try to write. And when you let a lot of people from other countries and let them not to assimilate in your country, what happens is they try to compete with your culture and they try to enforce their own culture upon your culture. Because multiculturalism doesn't work. Why? Because many cultures try to compete for dominance. That's what cultures do, because everybody has their own cultural moral frame and they think their cultural moral frame is much more important than yours and much more suitable. And what they do, they usually bring their own culture to your culture. And if you don't fight back, if you don't try to force people assimilate to your culture, what you create small other cultures who eventually would damage your main culture. That's how it works. And that's what I don't like about humanism, because they try to equate everything. They believe that all cultures are equal. And this makes no sense, because if all cultures were equal, we would be living peacefully well with each other. We wouldn't have wars and we actually would be almost the same, but we're not, because different cultures, different meanings and different stories. And those stories usually compete with each other and sometimes manifest themselves in war. Also, I noticed one thing about humanism: it treats people in some sense infantile. Like, for example, if they see immigrants and they try to educate them about sexual assault, you shouldn't be educate them about it. It's a law, and this law must be punished. It doesn't matter what they do in their own countries. When they move to other countries, they must comply with the law of that country. They must be informed and they must learn the language of this country, adapt to the culture, or reject it. That's the only thing, because you cannot force people of the country to adapt their idea of living to foreigners. It makes no sense. And this idea that, again, if you criticize immigrants who refuse to adapt to your country, you're somehow racist, make no sense, because I really met almost no racists in America. Because it's making no sense, because racism as a term became so broad that it covers as a blanket everyone you disagree with. Because for me, definition of racism if you believe that your skin color somehow superior to other skin colors. But you have to be incredibly dumb to believe in this idea. I believe in superiority of culture, not of superiority of race. Because superiority of culture is a real one, because culture built through centuries and trained people inside of this culture through centuries to be able to manifest itself in some comfortable, decent living. All our laws in America based on a common British laws, common English laws. And that's why we are such a great nation. That's why America has incredibly superior culture to any other cultures on the planet. And people who don't like to hear it, it's their problem, because it makes no sense. And that's what another thing I don't like about humanism is they really try to equate all religion as well. And in some sense, they're afraid to criticize Islam. I don't know why. And they use this term like Islamophobia and racism, although Islam is not a race, and therefore you can criticize Islam's theology as much as you want. But for some reason, a lot of liberals, a lot of humanists, they refuse to go into that territory for some reason. And in some sense, they refuse to criticize it. Or if they criticize it, they have to equate Islam with Christianity, for example. Like it does the same damage to American or European culture. It doesn't make no sense because, for example, let's think about it carefully, about humanism. Because humanism derives its root from Christianity itself. Because humanism was born in Christianity, in a Christian nation, through the Enlightenment. Because it's only in Christian nation humanism is possible due to Enlightenment. I want to ask you a question: why humanism was never born in the 50+ Islamic state across our planet? Why exactly humanism was born as a part of Christianity, and all those humanistic beliefs and laws is Christianity itself, just an incredibly light form? And even humanists themselves, they don't understand, some of them, that they're part of Christian world, because that's what humanism is, even the word human, when we believe in individualism. Because all these human rights of the individuals came from Christianity. Christianity is in every aspect of our life. We take it for granted that we actually forgot that we are Christians. And I think we should start defend Christianity much more assertively than we do it now, because a lot of Christians became so soft on defense and they became so compliant with atheists, and they for some reason accept all the attack on themselves. Another thing I hate about the West right now is that you always have to defend the purity of your thoughts, because any criticism you address to certain minority groups, for example, their cultural identity or their religion identity, you have to always state that you're not racist and blah, blah, blah. Because I like to engage with ideas. I don't attack people. I attack ideas. I attack theology that goes against Christianity. I attack humanism because humanism does a really great disservice to Christianity, to the Western civilization. Because we keep letting people attack Christianity. We're letting people attack the West while benefit from Christianity from the West. It does make no sense. We have a lot of immigrants who openly hate the Western civilization while being elected on high positions and make a lot of money. And if you dare to attack them, all you hear back is that you Islamophobe or racist. That's a big problem. For example, it's a good example. If you take America, right, you can see how it works. For example, take the term black culture, right? If you don't like black culture, they call you racist. Although you're not talking about race, you talk about culture that, for example, celebrate crime, and you don't like it. But you see what they did? They put word black in the front of the culture, creating this protective term against criticizing this particular culture. And that's a big problem when you try to say, I don't like this culture, I believe its culture celebrate crime, and therefore crime rate as the result of this culture going up is bad, and I don't want to be part of this culture, also I don't want nothing to do with this culture. You somehow become racist, because that's what they do. The same what they did Black Lives Matter, for example. You cannot criticize this movement, because if you criticize this movement, if you dare criticize this movement, you somehow become racist, because again they put word black in front of this movement, and you're not criticizing people's ethnicity. You criticize the movement itself, or you criticize the culture itself, or you criticize religion like Islam itself, but you cannot, because Islam has interesting protection in the West, and I don't know why though, like the word Islamophobia, and it's still pretty much powerful word. People terrified. And I noticed, because I talked to a lot of people about it, and a lot of people agree with me, but when they see Muslim around, they change right away and they become incredibly silent and would never criticize Islam, for example, if there's Muslim present. And it's just the West. We have to keep exercising our freedom of speech. We have to keep defending the West. But the only thing to defend the West is not be tolerant, stupidly tolerant, when you just tolerate everything to your own detriment and to detriment of your own culture. You have to be critical of things that might hurt the West, because the West was built as the result of Christianity, and we have to accept it. That's why if we don't defend Christianity, eventually the West would collapse, because less and less people would believe in Christianity, and stop practicing Christian traditions that are exactly pillars of the West. And we have to be very careful and very aware of that. Otherwise, how are you supposed to defend the West? What exactly humanists defend? What exactly are they ready to die for? Because atheism or humanism, they don't celebrate the idea of proper sacrifice. They don't know why would they sacrifice for something. But the West was built on the idea of proper sacrifice, because people who built the West, they made proper sacrifice for us to live this way. But the problem is, if we're going to take the West for granted and if we are afraid to defend it, just with words, just criticizing ideas that goes against the West, and criticize the religion that goes against the West, or cultures that goes against the West, how are we supposed to improve the West and other people in general? Because you improve yourself and other people through criticism, through constructive criticism. When you say that Islam goes against the Western values, it's not degrading criticism, it's just criticism that make certain foundation underneath. If you criticize that certain cultures don't want to accept the West, and they go against the West values, the West moral frame, it's not degrading term to the certain cultures. It's in some sense the criticism that you try to protect what you love, and we have to protect it, because the West is all we have and Christianity is all we have. I think we need to become more assertive as Christians, because Christianity needs defend right now. Otherwise, humanism just would destroy the West by being incredibly tolerant to everything, even to their own conquerors.